Sure.
Years ago, Arvid Braston and a Hassinger had a garage right across from the post office. Ishpeming Motors. And Frank Tassin was a mechanic there. And somehow or other, something went wrong that Frank got fired. Frank's mother didn't like it. So what does she do? She takes a knife and goes down to the Ishpeming Motor garage and stabs Mr. Hassinger. And I can remember Billy Andrews and I, we'd go for a walk at night up on that hill where that house is up on the hill there, you know, at the end of Vine Street.
Yeah.
Because Billy Andrews had a crush on one of the Johnson girls, Snort Johnson's sister, Bunny. We had to go down there and, boy, he waited for her to make an appearance, you know, or anybody. He'd get excited. And that's where we were when that all happened. And I think that Mrs. Tassin served time for that. That's one of the incidents downtown. Another thing we used to do, a lot of people made moonshine in those days.
Prohibition.
And we used to like to go when the state police came to raid the place. We liked to go and watch them throw the bottles out the door and smash them. We saw a couple of those downtown. Right back in the chocolate shop, across the alley where Hickey's Bar is, there was one of those establishments. And I can remember how the state police would stand inside and fire the bottles outside, smash them. They were raiding the place. Another place was right over back in the Globe Printing, that first house. They raided that. Well, we had a little excitement in those days.
Yeah. And the fire downtown.
What?
The fire. What was the name of that? It was a bar downtown. It was made of wood.
Oh.
And the place went up in flames.
Oh, Carl's Log Cabin.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It was all made out of birch and flammable material. Very flammable. There were branches from trees in there and all that kind of stuff, and highly varnished furniture and a regular fire trap. That was down at the Selwood building. And it was in the winter time. We were having exams, and it was about 30 below zero weather. Whoa, it was bitter cold. And Tilson's had a drugstore on the corner, and then it was Carl's Log Cabin. And that fire started. Nothing put it out. Oh, it was water was running across the railroad tracks and freezing. All kinds of people watching it. That was one of the fires. Another fire was the Nelson Hotel. That was right on the corner from where the Mather Inn is. That was a beautiful fire too. And in the grammar school, we've had some pretty good fires in the YMCA. When the National Guard had the armory there, that was a pretty good blaze too. So we've had some pretty good fires.
Yep.
But the town has deteriorated an awful lot. When I was a kid and growing up, I wrote down all the businesses that used to be in town when I was a kid, and it filled at least 4 pages. A lot of people wouldn't know them because they weren't even born when some of those businesses were there. But we had Burke's Livery Stable and the Ishmael Livery Stable and Consolidated Fuel and Lumber Company had a big spread up where the funeral home is. The coal and wood yard, scales to weigh the coal. They had across the street where the mini mart is there now. There used to be sheds there that they kept lumber in and moldings, all that kind of stuff. All done as far as the old Ishmael Creamy. And then between the railroad tracks, they had sheds where they kept the cement and wood fiber and roofing and all that kind of stuff. Down where the OK Auto is, we're got a storage there now. But right out alongside of the sidewalk were the offices. And there was Tom Williams worked in the office, John Viking, William Argle, and Mr. Nichols. And those are the ones I remember as a kid. But they had some long-figured ones in there, and that's why the place went belly up. In the back of the offices, they had all kinds of sheds there and buildings where your Grandpa Sunday used to work, making doors, windows, and all that kind of stuff. And there was a man by the name of Sandstrom who was the millwright. I guess he had charge of making the doors and windows. But your grandpa used to work there too. And then over where the creek ran through, there was a big barn. And of course, CF&L had a lot of horses because they used to deliver coal and wood. And they had sleighs in the winter and wagons in the summer. They had nice horses. And the guy that took care of the horse barn was Anton Clifton. He was the barn boss.
Just think how times have changed, hey?
Oh, that's for sure.
They used to have to keep a stable of horses
Yep,
to do deliveries.
yep.
And now they got a fleet of trucks.
Crap, you don't even see coal now, do you?
No. No.
Everything is gas or electric. And then Becca worked in the, Cal Pullman had the gas station right across from where the funeral home is. And around early Depression years, Mecca used to get a couple of hours a day and relieve Cal so he could go home and eat and stuff like that. But he didn't make much money. A couple of hours a day, that's all. Every little bit helped.
How many kids were at home at that time?
Well, there was Grandma Johnson, my mother and dad, Jenny, let's see, Yeah, Jenny, because she married Doc, and the two of them lived at our house. And there were Borgel and Florence, Margaret, Ruth, Agnes, and me. We were a house full.
How many were working?
Huh?
How many were working though?
Well, like I said, in the Depression, Borgel and Florence, Jenny, worked at the Gossard. That was about it. My dad probably had 2 shifts a week or something like that because he had to split it up with all those other guys up there. And we had a direct car. And a direct car, it was a beauty in its day. It had a Continental motor in it. They were supposed to be good motors. But it had rotten brakes. The brakes used to grab. And it was hard starting. I can remember going in the garage and trying to start that car to give my dad to a worker or else go out and get him. And I'd crank my guts out trying to start it. Gee, it was a beautiful car in its day. Beautiful finish, and the cloth inside was like a tiger motif or whatever you'd call it. It was supposed to have been a pretty classy car.
Crank start?
It had fender wells and spare tires on the side, trunk on the back.
And a crank start?
It had 4 speeds forward and 2 for reverse. But the brakes were no good. But you know what? More than once, we'd scratch our pennies together to buy a couple of gallons of gas, and my mother loved to ride. And 10 o'clock or so, or whenever we took my dad to work, sometimes it would be around 10 o'clock, and we'd go for a ride to Marquette. And then we'd stop at that little store on the corner there. It was called Millie's. She dished out delicious ice cream cones. And that's what we do. We loved to do that when we had enough money to do it. Because we'd have to all pitch in, scrape our pennies together and buy enough gas, and you'd have just about enough to go there and back. Nothing to spare. Things were really tight in the Depression, I'll tell you. One time, Mecca had a source where he could get butter, like I said, a pound of butter. My mother was an excellent cook. Oh, she baked the most delicious bread, donuts, rolls, cinnamon rolls. Oh, God. She'd make cinnamon rolls, and then I don't know how she made it, but she'd make something that she'd put on the back. They were delicious, like it almost looked like a molasses, or syrup or something. They were delicious. And then other buns, just plain buns. We used to just like to eat them the way they were, without anything on them. Cookies. And one time, she was going to, when she baked, she gave me some buns and that, and a pound of butter to take up to Uncle Hank and Aunt Eva. and I delivered them. And Aunt Eva got so mad that she didn't speak to my mother. And she never invited my mother up there or anything anymore. She was a cousin Ginny, see, and her pride got the best of her. They had nothing. They didn't have nothing. Hank wasn't working, and my mother thought she was doing something good. Sent her those freshly baked buns and a pound of butter. It insulted Aunt Eva. And that's the way those people were. Another person, you know, they'd appreciate it.
Never spoke to her again.
Not for a long time. Aunt Eva would entertain people, and some of my mother's friends would be invited. Not my mother. But that was the Francis family. They were all like that. Typical Cousin Jacks. But she finally come around. My mother forgot it. That's the way Anola was just like my mother. Because if somebody slapped her on one cheek, she turned the other. Mother was the same way. And mother was more like my mother than any of my sisters. She was built like my mother, her arms and her personality was the same as my mother's.
So tell me about your dad's family.
What?
Tell me about your dad's family. His brothers.
His brothers? Well, I'll tell you what. My dad had brother Richard. He was born in the Isle of Man. Brother John was born in the Isle of Man. Then there was Phil, Jim, Tommy I don't know anything about because he died when he was about 7 or 8 years old. But I know about Jim and Phil and Dick. My dad was mechanically inclined, and Dick was more or less the financier, that type. And Aunt Kate was one of my dad's sisters. Lived where Elizabeth Johnson lives now. That was Aunt Kate and her husband was a captain. Oh crap. Started with a B. Buzzle. Captain Buzzle was her husband. Well, over at the New York mine, they had iron ore that they were going to get rid of. I don't know who owned it, if Tilden owned it or if Clark people in Marquette. Because I guess Clark's owned 240s over there, and I guess they got to own it. Because Clark's were working for Tilden, who was a presidential candidate years ago. And he almost won out as president. The Electoral College beat him out of it. That's the same reason the Tilden mine is named after him. My grandma, Quail, used to collect ground rent for the Clark people. All through the New York location, all the houses, they had to pay ground rent. Because that ground was owned by Clarks in Marquette. And my Uncle Dick and Captain Buzzo and my dad had an agreement. They were going to ship iron ore from the New York mine. I don't know where they shipped it, if it was a furnace at Deer Lake or if it was at Wells or Newberry or what. But anyway, they shipped iron ore. My dad did the mechanical work. And Captain Buzzo and the other, I suppose they did the sampling, and Dick did the financial work. Well, come to find out, my dad got beat out of his share. My Aunt Kate burned the agreement because she didn't want any trouble in the family. So she burned the agreement. So my dad got beat out of his share. And they claimed that that's what Dick Quail built that big building down in Gwyn with. The money that he made off of the iron ore. So Dick Quail lived in Gwyn. Before he lived in Gwyn, he had a store in Ishpeming. And Charlie Hawes was his son-in-law. He married Dick Quail's oldest daughter, who would be a first cousin of mine. And that's one reason why I got a job in the laboratory, because Charlie was the chief chemist. Well, like I said, the agreement was she burned. My dad got gypped out of it.
Hey,
And
want no food for me?
Dick Quail,
I only stopped and got a pop. No food for me.
Dick Quail and his family and us, we never associated.
And that's the quail that's the relative to the ones that are out in Idaho.
That big stone over there, the quail back of that one was Dick Quail. Dick Quail and his wife, his daughter Millie, and his son Clayton, and Clayton's little girl.
And Clayton had boys.
Oh yeah, Clayton's the one that had boys.
And those are the
One
ones that
got
are,
killed in service, World War II, and he got 2 out in Idaho.
right, and that's the one I talked to.
Yes. Yeah. They'd be second cousins of mine. Because Clayton Quail was the first cousin. And the little girl that's buried over there, Jean, she was about maybe 2 years old, and they lived right along the Escanaba River there in Gwyn. Dick Quail had a great big brick house down there. Beautiful home. He owned the next house, and I think he owned the next house too. He had lots of money. He had lots of timber property. And that little girl waddled across the street and got into the river and she drowned. Clayton had a beautiful voice. He was a singer. Beautiful voice. And I think he was in World War I, I'm not sure. But anyway, he finally ended his life too. He committed suicide. That would be Barbara Sherman's father.
And he had a son.
Billy, those lads, it would be their father that he committed suicide. See, those lads are brothers to Barbara Sherman. Yeah, Barbara Sher. Millie Quail in Gwyn was a sister to Clayton Quail.
So Clayton and Millie were the children of Dick Quail.
Huh?
I got it. I got it. I got that written down.
Well, you got a lot of information.
Yeah. I'm gonna talk you out now. I'm gonna get you to talk to me some more. Is that okay?
What?
I'm gonna get you to talk to me some more. Is that okay?
About what?
Tell me about your mom and dad.
Well,
They were both born here, weren't they? Were they both born in Ishpeming?
what?
Were they both born in Ishpeming?
No, my mother was born in Trondheim, Norway. She was 3 years old when she came over to this country. And
And her mother lived with you folks, right? Lived with your family.
yeah, but when Grandma Johnson and my mother and Hansina came over here, I think Hansina was 6 years old. My mother was 3. And they never knew what they were coming to. They came over, I think it was about the same time that President Garfield was assassinated, and they had the funeral, and I think they went down to Palmer for some reason or other, because Grandma Johnson always mentioned that President Garfield was buried. He had been assassinated, and his funeral was around that time. And then Grandpa Johnson was a shoemaker. He and Old Man Grody. Old Man Grody had a couple of girls. One was Magda, and the other was Marie Grody. She was a school teacher, 8th grade teacher at the grammar school. And I had her for a teacher, and Uncle Bill had her for a teacher. And Uncle Bill used to mention about the time that there was a lad misbehaving in the class. And she took the lad, and there was a little hall, like, separate from the classroom, where you used to hang your wraps. And she took that lad out there and hung him on one of the hooks. So he had to behave. Oh, to listen to Bill tell that.
Okay, so your mother came over here from Trondheim when she was 3 years old.
Yeah,
Grandpa Johnson was already over here at
he
that
was,
time?
he was already over here.
And then he sent back for them to come over.
Yeah. But he was a character too. He was a shoemaker, but he also liked the alcoholic beverages. And when he got drunk, he was terrible. Abusive.
Yeah.
Poor Grandma Johnson, she had a rough life.
What was her name?
Caroline.
Caroline Johnson?
Her maiden name was Egan. And actually, I think Grandpa Johnson's name was Hans Johnston.
With a T?
Huh?
With a T? Johnston?
Uh, I don't know, but you know, the Scandinavians, the Swedes and the Norwegians, when they came over to this country, a lot of them changed their names.
Yeah, because
If you're John over there, over here it was probably John's son,
yeah,
the son of John.
Sundin. Over there, it's spelled Sundin.
Uh,
Over here, it's Sundeen.
yeah, they changed it.
Yeah, they
That's
changed
why
it.
it's so hard to trace some people, because so many of them changed their names.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, he was a shoemaker, and like I said, they claim he was a good man when he was sober. He knew the Bible from one end to the other, but when he was drunk, oh, he was terrible.
And then he
So
hung
Grandma
him,
Johnson had a rough life.
and he hung himself. See the one that hung himself?
Huh?
See the one that hung himself? He went and strung himself
Yes.
up.
Yeah, he did away with himself. And then, of course,
Hansina was her sister.
what?
Hansina was her sister.
Yes.
Did she have any other sisters or brothers?
Her brothers was Alfred Johnson and Henry Johnson, Elizabeth's dad. So, Alfred never had any children. Henry had Elizabeth and Bud, or Henry Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And Henry Jr., he died several years ago. He worked for a mining company, and I don't know, something wrong with, he died kind of sudden. Elizabeth is still living. All
Did-
by herself.
Yeah, did Henry get married?
Henry did. Henry was Elizabeth's dad. Alfred,
No, Henry Jr.
oh, Henry Jr., yeah, he did. He married a lad by the name of Frank Grenville, lived over by Daisy Bluff, he and his wife. And they got divorced, and Bud Jr., or Henry Jr., married Frank Grenville's wife. Frank Grenville lived back on Empire Street. I knew all of them. And
Did they have any kids?
no,
No?
no.
Thank you.
And like I say, Grandma Johnson lived with us. And of course she helped us a lot. And I think I was her favorite. 'Cause gee, she was good to me. Real good.
Yeah.
Like I said, there wasn't much money. She never had any money. But if she had a few pennies, why, if I needed a penny or wanted a penny, she'd see to it that I got it. And like I say, she used to help us a lot, or help my mother a lot, doing dishes and stuff like that, and helping with ironing and stuff, sewing, knitting. Every Christmas, she knit us mitts and socks. I used to have homemade knitted socks. She did it. Because I always wore high tops. I wasn't allowed to wear gold seals because they had the crazy notion that gold seals affected the eyes. Crazy, you know. And then I can remember having a winter jacket made, and Grandma Johnson would knit the cuffs and the band around the bottom. It'd be a blazer. But oh, she was a wonderful woman. Boy, she was kind-hearted. And then, of course, when I was a kid, like I said, my friend was Carl Lindblom across the street. And oh, we used to play together lots. Played catch on our driveway. He'd be the catcher and I'd be the pitcher, and I'd burn them into him. A lot of fun. Gee, we played catch lots. Played baseball, football, basketball. For basketball, we'd go around and look for a banana crate, cut it in half, hang it up on the barn eave for the basket. Never thought of buying never saw hoops in the store to buy. Couldn't buy them anyway, there was no money. And Carl used to like to play marbles. Put your heel in the ground and go around and make the hole. Oh, Carl used to like to play marbles, especially with the littler kids.
Take all their marbles.
You'd play marbles and he'd win, of course you'd take the marbles. So. And we used to go up on the bluff a lot. Make kites, go up on the bluff and fly them. Cowboys and Indians. I'd get to go to a theater on Saturday afternoon, and the only way I got to go was I'd take care of Don Tripp, and Mrs. Tripp would pay my fare. It was probably 5 cents or 10 cents to get in, but she'd pay my fare if I took care of Don. And then, of course, after, there were always cowboy shows, mostly Tom Mix and all that, you know, Hoot Gibson, Buffalo Bill. Then we'd go up on the bluff afterwards and probably play Cowboys and Indians, besides flying kites. And the kites, we always made our own. I was always the master kite maker. Get some narrow strips and put the string around, and then we'd get a couple of newspapers and make the paper and fold it over the string, and for glue we made flour and water. That was the glue. Then we got a little bit older, probably 10, 11, 12. We'd in the spring of the year, we'd go up on Jackson Bluff and think we were going to tap a tree for sap. We'd make a little hole and hang a little bucket there for the sap to run in. Then somebody would go up there and pee in the bucket. And we spent a lot of time down at Partridge Creek fishing for trout.
Yeah.
Never catch any, but we fished anyway. I remember once going with a friend of mine, Arnold Solstead. He's still living too, out in Colorado or someplace. And he was a Lutheran from Trinity. Anyway, this one day he came to get me, and we were going to go fishing up Partridge Creek. We walked down the railroad tracks, because that's where Partridge Creek was. And oh, no luck, no luck. And then of course it ran through the consolidated yard. So we went down through there. There were some other kids fishing there. And one was Mrs. Viant, Charlotte Viant's brother, Jake McWilliams. And Jake had caught a trout down there, and they lived right by the Partridge Creek. And they had a porch out in the back. And Jake caught a fish, and it was over on the porch. What did Arnold Solstead do? He didn't fish anymore. He went over there on the porch and stole that fish. And we took off. Oh, what a guy. And then, of course, in the wintertime, the Canlon family lived up on the corner. Oh, there was Leonard and Martha and Edna, Martin, and Abby. I used to call him Abby, because I could, Albert I guess his name was. I couldn't say Albert. But in the back of their house, they were chums and Beccas. They'd build snow houses back there, tunneling and all that. And then they'd take a candle, melt the snow inside so it wouldn't cave in, make it all ice. And I can remember they'd get me in there and then they'd block the entrance. Then it'd be pitch black and I'd be in there yelling to get out. Albert, they were all smart kids, those Canlon kids. They were all smart. Finlanders, you know. They're either that way or they're the other way. And Albert went to University of Michigan. He became a doctor. Out in California, he had his business. Martha, she was married to somebody in Lower Michigan. Edna married in Lower Michigan. And Martin, he was kind of the outcast of the family. He was out in Pennsylvania. He was an engineer. They all did good. And Leonard married a Sunberg girl from over by Hoysett's store. And he used to own the Ishman Creamery, and then they sold that. And they went out to Denver, I think. And he died out there. And his wife has died, and they had children. And then, of course, next door to the Martin family, there was two families on that one lot. Jack Martin, he was a mail carrier. He had a little house on that lot, back of Canlon's house. And of course I chummed with Jack Martin and Donald Martin. And they had a sister called Arbutus, I think. She married a Haglin boy. She died a long time ago. And Jack Martin was married to Mary Martin that used to come to Grandma Sunley's.
Mm-hmm.
He used to do work for her. He died quite a few years ago too. He didn't treat Mary very well. And Donald Martin was a mail carrier in Marquette. But he was retired, and I think he died a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And of course, Billy Andrews, there was a vacant lot between us and Andrews's, and Billy Andrews and I, we used to play together, and we used to fight like the Dickens too. He and I didn't see eye to eye. But Billy Andrews died, about 2 years ago, I guess. Mm-hmm. He used to play drums. He played drums for about 80 years, I think. His hands were all gnarled up. And they had a home on Johnson Lake. And that's where they lived. He and his wife Millie. And Millie died about 4 years ago. And they were in, they had a business, kind of an investment business. But Millie, the wife, was the brains of the outfit. They never had any children. There was a lad who lived across from them in Limbum's little house. That was right across from where I used to live too. And this lad, his parents were alcoholics. So this lad came home from school one day. I don't know what grade he was in. And he went over to Billy Andrews' house. He said, "You don't have any kids." He said, "How about being my dad?" So they took him in. And he lived with them. And when they moved down to Johnson Lake, the lad went with them. The lad worked for Sam in the bank in Marquette. Kind of a sharp lad, I guess. But Donna Jean knows that lad because Billy Andrews was an uncle to Donna Jean, just like I am, see? And that lad fell into everything that Billy Andrews had. He had a camp and he owned property on the Escanaba River down below Palmer. And they had money too. Drove a Lincoln car. He used to go to Florida every year. He fell into everything. I bet he had quite a chunk of dough.
Mm-hmm.
So that lad was pretty lucky. Then, of course, we used to play over on Daisy Bluff a lot. We made our own ski hills. We'd collect Christmas trees after Christmas, lay them down and pile snow on them to make a scaffold. And we did a lot of ski riding over on Daisy Bluff. And Daisy Bluff was just across the plains where we used to play baseball and hit a golf ball once in a while down there. We used to go down and play on the tracks quite a bit because the Northwestern and the South Shore used to do a lot of switching down there. And we used to shack rides. Dangerous thing to do. One day I missed the step on the car I went to shack. That cured me. I thought I was going to go under the wheel. Gee, talk about nuts. And then, like I said, the old gas house was there. We used to play down in the gas house a lot. There was nothing in there. Just a dirt floor, and all the machinery and everything was taken out. There was nothing in it. We used to pick up butts, and go down there and smoke them. Buster Ryan and I. And then in Hoyson's store, crap, I practically lived up there. I used to like to ride with the teamster so I could drive the horse. And I rode with quite a few of the teamsters. Pee Wee Beale, Gerald Sloat, Karen's grandfather. He was a Peterson from down to 20 Houses, Rudy Peterson.
Delivering groceries?
And Stanley Franson. We used to ride with all of them.
Delivering groceries.
Huh?
Delivering groceries. delivering the groceries?
Yeah, delivering groceries, yeah. Horse and wagon. Then they used to have a tank of kerosene on there because people used to use kerosene to light their kitchen stove in the mornings. So sometimes people would buy a gallon of kerosene. So we had that too. And there used to be a cigar factory upstairs of Hoysett Store. John Goodman, our neighbor on the corner from where we lived, next to Tripp's, he used to make cigars up there. Chief and the White Ash were the brands he made. Pretty good memory, eh?
Yep.
And then when I got about 12 or 13, 12, maybe 13 years old, Hub, they used to have the papers like Milwaukee Sentinel, the Milwaukee Journal, Detroit Free Press, and the Detroit News. They used to have guys that would go around and set up people to handle their papers. The Olson's newsstand had several different papers, the Sentinel, the Journal, the Tribune, and Detroit Free Press, Detroit News. And I had made a route, got people to buy papers from me. Well, my mother didn't exactly like that I was going to deliver papers on Sunday. That meant that I didn't have to go to Sunday school anymore. She said, I'll talk to your father about it, but I don't think he's going to like it. So she mentioned it to him, and well, he didn't like it, but he let me do it anyway. That was the end of my going to Sunday school when I was about 13 years old. And I used to deliver quite a few papers. And the papers were heavy. I had to go down to Olson's newsstand to pick them up. There's no wonder I got one shoulder a little lower than the other, hanging those bags on my shoulders. And we had a walk, no rides. And finally in the wintertime, I had a sleigh. And I had a wagon in the summertime. A lot of times I carried them on my shoulders too. And it was tough times. People wanted the paper, but they couldn't afford it. I know people that right to this day that didn't pay me for what they owed me for the papers, but they still had to have the paper. And later on, of course, these are Depression years. Skinny Brewer had a radio shop next to Leroy, who used to be a cleaning shop, clean clothes. Leroy's Cleaners. Down on the corner of First Street and Cleveland Avenue, the northwest corner, where Stab had his electric shop. That was Leroy's. Later on, they built a shop in the back that was made out of concrete blocks. But it was a wooden building, the first one. Well, anyway, Skinny Brewer had a radio shop next door. Just a little hole in the wall. Tough times, you know. Skinny Brewer didn't have anything. And Al Stam didn't have anything. And Gordon Brozick, he handled the wireless communications for the CCI up in the office. They had wireless communications with the ships, ore carriers. And things were rough because there was very few ore boats and he didn't work much. And I can remember him to this day, the raggy coats that he wore and stuff like that. Then on the side, he'd come to Skinny Brewer's and kind of help to repair radios. And Skinny Brewer, he had the agency for the Earl and Howard radios. They were considered pretty good radios. And we had a lot of fun there. I used to go down there. You had to stuff the paper, see. You'd get them one sheet and then a sheet to go in the side and another sheet, and you'd have them stacked. And I'd have to take one here, one here, one here, and that's what they call stuffing the papers.
Yep.
And I used to do that for Skinny Brewer, go down there on a Saturday evening and stuff the papers. Never got anything for it. He didn't have anything. And finally, Gordon, coming out of the Depression, then WBEO in Marquette, radio station, the Mining Journal, built a station. And that was their call letters, WBEO. Gordon Brosick got a job with them, and he moved to Marquette. Al Stam built a store on the corner, and he had the electric shop. Skinny Brewer, he phased out. And then next to Skinny Brewer used to be Jernstedt Electric Shop. He was an electric contractor. And later on in life, when Mr. Tripp died, he married Mrs. Tripp. And he owned the house that Bobby Carlson has.
Mm-hmm.
And then next to Jernstedt's was Pickens Coal Company. It had just a little office. And there was a guy by the name of Manley. He was a Finn guy that lived on Ely Street, just down from where the funeral home is on 3rd Street. He had 2 kids, Baron Manley and William Manley. Well, come to find out, the father had embezzled quite a bit of money from Pickens Coal Company. And instead of facing the music, he killed himself. He shot himself.
Mm.
So that was the end of the Manley family. Winky went to Michigan Tech, and then he wound up, he was an engineer or something out in Ohio. And the girl, Marion Manley, she was a nice girl. She married Eddie Thomas, who was a lawyer. She was a nurse. And Eddie Thomas was a star basketball player at Ishmead High School, and then he went to University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Lawyer, and he also played basketball at the university. Then he was a lawyer for quite a few years. He went Mahola, and he got disbarred. I think he's still living in a camp up on Lake Michigamme. I knew him. He went to school and I did. And then Johnny Roberts had a jewelry store next to Pickens. Beautiful jewelry store. And then across the alley, there was a French guy by the name of Nault, had a pool room. And they called him Jump on Top, nickname. And in the same building, on the corner, Johnson Brothers had a clothing and shoe store. Snort Johnson that goes to Trinity Lutheran Church. Do you remember him?
Mm-hmm.
His father and his father's brother had a clothing store there, but it burned. So then the penny store, Hayden was the manager of the penny store, and he built the building, and penny stores rented it. They ran it for years, and finally it went out of business. And Hayden died. That finished that. Then I was getting up around probably 14 years old or so. Uncle Hub had a shoe shine parlor and hat cleaning establishment downtown, and I worked for him. And then, not much money, people quit cleaning their hats and shining shoes. He went belly up. So, and then in 1935, I got a job at the CCI lab and stayed there for 42 years and 3 months. And I was sub-supervisor when I finished for the last 10 years, running the lab part. Then that was going downhill. They had some girls there that, oh, they were terrible. And then the boss I had, why, he was for the birds too. More interested in working crossword puzzles than reporting the analysis. But I don't care, I did good work. One time before, it was several years before I finished, my boss came to me, he said, geez, Art, he said, the last store they shipped from Cliff Shaft went to Inland Steel. And he came to me, he said, oh, great, he said, we don't jibe with Inland Steel's analysis. He said, something's wrong. He said, we'll have to rerun the samples. So we went up and got the samples out, reran them. We got exactly the same results that we had in the first place, that I reported. But what did they do in the shipping department? Him and another lad, they blamed each other. They changed the numbers that I handed in and raised the iron results. And they were blaming each other. So, but we got exactly the same when we reran them.
Mm-hmm.
Time to quit when you get stuff like that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I did good work. I'm not bragging about myself or anything, but if you're going to do something, do it to the best of your ability.
Yep.
Oh, I was nuts though, because some of those guys in the lab, all they ran was one determination, like they either worked on irons or silicas or phos, sulfur or alumina or the irons. That's all they had to do. I know one, Don Anderson, he worked on the irons all the time. Simplest test that there was. And he stayed on irons all the time. And for years we were probably getting the same pay. I worked on silicas most of the time. I worked so much on silicas. Hard determination and a long determination. And it wasn't much fun. Irons were easy, but 10 years before I was through, I was working on, I could work the iron determination silica determination, phos, sulfur, manganese, alumina, lime, magnesia, titanium, ferrous iron, metallic iron, and loss of ignition. I could work all of them. And most of those other guys only had to work one or two. Besides, I used to repair the balances. Sometimes those little strings holding the counterweights would break. Nobody else fixed them. That happened, they'd have to either put it upstairs and forget about it or something, because nobody knew how to fix them. So I made it a point myself. Found out I could fix them. Cleaning the balances, Owen Hassett, let Art clean the balances. I don't want anybody else to touch them. But I did it after I had my other work done. The other guys were out hanging around the table working, goofing off, talking about hunting or fishing or something, which wasn't right. I was too conscientious.
Yep.
And put out work. My shift always turned out more work than the other shift. I remember times when we'd be asked to work Saturday night. It'd be an overtime shift. I never refused. I always worked them. I remember Pete Christian. He'd call me up at home. Art, are you going to be the boss Saturday night? Yeah, I'm going to work. Well, he said, if you're the boss, he said, I'll work. But if somebody else is the boss, I'm not working. Don Veal, the kid that took my place, about 2 weeks after I was through, I got a card from him. Art, do you want your job back? No thanks. I could see it was going to pot. Lads didn't care whether they worked or not. I could see it coming.
What happened to that place? They closed it up, eh?
They closed it up, yeah. Well, when they had the raw ore from underground, the ore varied one scoop with the other. There were different results. When they loaded into the cars varied, you know. These pellets are tailor-made. 6340 or 6350 or something like that. The whole string of cars would go the same. So it was nuts. The raw ores from underground, they'd sample about every 10 cars or something like that, see? Well, it was kind of foolish to sample every 10 cars for the pellets. They all ran about the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they finally got wise, and I think all they do is make a sample from the boat. Pick one up down at the boat and run that. Well, I knew that long time ago. We wondered why we had to have so many samples for pellets. Everything ran the same.
Yep. So, why did your grandpa Quail come here?
Well, I imagine that the tin or lead mines were getting exhausted, I imagine. And to better himself, because he came out here first, and I wish I knew for sure, because there used to be a mine right near Houghton. It was called the Isle Royal. I don't think it was that though. I think he went to Isle Royal, the island, because there used to be copper mines out there. Because they said he went to Isle Royal and then he went back to the Isle of Man to get his family. And they came out here and they landed at Untnoggin. And I guess they must have lived there for a little while. And then they went over to Franklin Township up on Quincy Hill. And then they came to Ishpeming in 1870. My Aunt Maud was born in Ishpeming in 1870. My dad was born in Ishpeming in 1872. And then there was Phil and Phil and Jim, Annie Kenna, Tommy. Tommy died when he was real young, 8 or 9 years old. But they all lived in that house up on Bigelow Street. And Grandpa Quail worked at that New York mine. They wanted him to be a shift boss or something. And he said he couldn't because he couldn't tell men to work. He couldn't